Something strange is lurking beneath the sands of Giza, and scientists have no idea what it is. Archaeologists just found a hidden structure near the Great Pyramid using advanced ground scanning technology. What's inside? Nobody knows, but excavations are already underway. The Great Pyramid of Giza is one of the most famous monuments on Earth, but it doesn't stand alone. It's surrounded by an ancient necropolis, a massive royal graveyard filled with tombs and monuments. They belong to pharaohs, nobles, and other high-ranking officials. Most of these tombs are above the ground. They're called mastabas, rectangular, flat-roofed tombs built from limestone or mud brick, and they've been studied for decades. But from old movies, we know that these weren't simple graves. They have deep vertical shafts leading to underground burial chambers, where the past was sealed away for eternity. And recently, archaeologists found one curious empty space in the cemetery, a completely unexplored patch of ground. No mastabas, no visible ruins, nada. For years they ignored it, but between 2021 and 2023, they decided to investigate. They didn't dig though. Instead, they used a technology that kind of acts like X-rays for the ground. These radars let scientists see the secrets hidden there. And there was something hidden beneath the sand, something deliberately buried and forgotten. A two-part underground structure. One part was shallow and L-shaped. It's about 33 feet long and buried just 6.5 feet deep. But below that, a deeper, more mysterious anomaly, a structure completely different from anything else in the area. They called it a highly resistive anomaly, which means it's dense and solid, likely made of stone, sand, or even metal. And still, no one has a clue what's inside it. Now, it's clear that humans made the L shape. It wasn't formed by nature. And the shallower structure might have been an entrance to whatever is hidden below. But they only have some theories about what might be hidden there. It's also filled with sand and gravel. It was probably deliberately backfilled after its construction, perhaps to preserve this. Why? Well, we don't know yet. The archaeological team will need to excavate to understand what exactly this thing was and why it was built. The first guess is a lost burial chamber. Many tombs in Giza have underground burial sites, but most have clear surface markers. This one, for some reason, has nothing, but it could be one of them. The second guess is an ancient offering chapel. Egyptologists know that some chapels were built in this shape, but usually they were above ground, not buried like this. And finally, it might be something we've never seen before. If this turns out to be a new type of structure, it could rewrite what we know about the burials of pharaohs. The only way to know for sure is to dig it up. And that's exactly what's happening right now. Excavations are already underway. Archaeologists are racing against time to uncover the truth. But there's a real danger there too. Giza's fragile ancient structures need to be handled carefully. Otherwise, they could be damaged beyond repair. So all we can do is wait for the truth. Now, these tombs always held fascinating mysteries. Unfortunately, we'll never learn tons of these mysteries because of some relentless tomb robbers. Egyptian tombs were built to guard the bodies for eternity. But that absolutely didn't stop people from breaking in and stealing everything valuable inside. They've been bothering these ancient sites for thousands of years, starting way back in Pharaoh's times. Many of the most famous tombs, including those in Giza, Saqqara, and the Valley of the Kings, were looted. It was a common practice in ancient Egypt. And they were serious about this whole thing. They dug secret tunnels to bypass traps and walls, bribed or threatened tomb workers to get inside knowledge, cracked open sarcophagi to grab gold, jewelry, and artifacts. And by the time modern archaeologists got to most of these tombs, they had already been picked clean. The reigning pharaohs got tired of this infuriating nonsense. The Valley of the Kings, the famous burial ground of Egyptian royalty, was supposed to be the ultimate safe zone. Tombs were built deep underground, hidden in the desert. Passages were sealed with giant stone blocks. False doors and traps were added to confuse thieves. Even curses were written on the walls, warnings of horrible endings for anyone who dared to disturb the tomb. which is exactly where we got all those horror stories about mummies from. Spoiler alert, none of it worked. Most tombs in the Valley of the Kings were fully robbed within 100 years of being sealed. Even King Tutankhamun's tomb, one of the most famous in history, was broken into twice in ancient times. Some of them decided to try and fight back. The New Kingdom rulers built hidden unmarked tombs in a way that should have prevented the looters from finding them, but didn't work. Some pharaohs, like Ramses II, were moved in secret to prevent their bodies from being stolen. Nope, didn't matter. The grave robbers always won. That's because tomb raiders weren't just random thieves. They were skilled, organized, and well-connected. They knew exactly where to look. Many were the ones who had built these sites in the first place, and they knew where the entrances were. If they couldn't smash through the doors, they'd dig through the walls, floors, and even ceilings to break inside. They also worked fast, often within a few years after the tombs were sealed, before anyone forgot where the valuable stuff was. The Khufu's pyramid, the one that's next to this newly discovered structure, was looted long before modern times. The one thing left inside when explorers got there? An empty granite box where the sarcophagus used to be. Unfortunately, it's not just about gold. History itself gets stolen during these raids. Ancient Egyptians wrote detailed records of what exactly and where they buried. So when archaeologists compare these lists to what's found, they can see what's missing, which is often everything valuable. Most artifacts don't end up in museums. They just disappear into private collections, where they can never be studied again. Which is, of course, completely unfair. In fact, a few countries have had enough and started passing laws to take historical artifacts back from private collectors. In Italy, if you own an ancient Roman artifact, you must prove you got it legally. China is actively hunting down stolen artifacts, and they must find ways to retrieve it back from the Western collectors. In Egypt, they passed new laws making it illegal for private citizens to own any ancient Egyptian artifacts at all. Other countries, like the US, the UK, Germany, or Switzerland, are completely fine with rich guys owning their history. The British Museum is built on looted things. European empires invaded half the planet and took whatever they wanted back home. Their museums are often full of such stolen artifacts, and unfortunately, they refuse to give most of them back. For example, the Rosetta Stone. It was taken from Egypt by Napoleon's army, then stolen again by the British after they beat the French. Egypt has been demanding to return for years, but they still can't get it back. Or the Parthenon marbles. These magnificent massive Greek structures were taken from the Parthenon in Athens by a British lord in the 19th century. Greece has been begging for them back ever since, but the UK doesn't feel like it. Not to mention tons of Mesoamerican artifacts, scattered in various museums across the world. European explorers raided Mayan and Aztec temples, took statues, jewelry, and sacred objects, and now Mexico is fighting to get them back. Well, wouldn't it be surprising even if this mysterious underground chamber has somehow been looted already? But if it's a newly found place, could it be one of the few that escaped the hands of grave robbers? Could there still be ancient artifacts, untouched for 4,500 years? We can only hope that those guys didn't get there first. If there's a question that still baffles archaeologists to this day, it's this one. How did the ancient Egyptians build those magnificent pyramids? As far as we know today, their resources were quite limited, especially in terms of tools and building materials. We still don't have a fully satisfying answer, but hey, we've got some pretty amazing theories worth considering. The leading contender among these theories involves the clever Egyptians employing a sneaky strategy. Now picture this. They constructed a slanted and curving mound made of bricks, earth, and sand encircling the pyramid to be. As the pyramid grew taller and taller, they simply increased the height and length of this wacky structure. It's like they were playing an ancient game of Jenga. Now, how did they get those massive stone blocks up there? Well, according to the legendary ancient Greek historian Herodotus, they used sleds, rollers, and levers. It sounds like they turned construction into a supersized game of tug-of-war. And guess what? Herodotus also claimed that the Great Pyramid, the one from Giza, the granddaddy of them all, took a whopping 20 years to build. There's more. Herodotus also dropped a mind-boggling number on us. 100,000 men were supposedly involved in this pyramid extravaganza. Did they hire the entire Egyptian population? Well, it might not be as far-fetched as it sounds. These men were probably mostly farmers, so they probably focused on the pyramids when there wasn't much work to be done in the fields. Like during the flood season of the Nile River. Obviously, specialists in the archaeological community had something to add to this theory. By the late 20th century, they discovered some evidence that suggests the workforce might have been smaller and more permanent than previously thought. Instead of a massive army of 100,000 pyramid builders, they proposed that a modest crew of around 20,000 workers, accompanied by support personnel like bakers, physicians, and even spiritual leaders, could have gotten the job done. There was also this theory that claimed that the pyramids were actually built from the top downward. It suggested that these colossal structures were nothing more than isolated hills used as quarries. The stones were supposedly drawn from these hills, and over time, competing engineers took charge and transformed them into the iconic pyramids we know today. Now, before you dismiss this theory as a wild fantasy, some folks thought it wasn't completely crazy. After all, there are instances where isolated hills exist, so maybe this theory had a tiny glimmer of truth. Whether it involved ramp building or ingenious work schedules, one thing is clear. Those pyramids have definitely left their mark on history and on our imaginations. Now, speaking of ancient Egyptian mysteries, there's this gigantic unfinished obelisk sitting in ancient Egypt, and scientists are trying to figure out how it was shaped. Now, some people suggest that our industrious ancestors used handheld pounders to get the job done. One expert has a different take on the matter, though. He argues that if we take a closer look at the pattern left behind by the shaping tool, we'll notice something peculiar. The walls of the trenches surrounding the obelisk display a neat and even pattern, which is pretty unlikely if they were pounded away by mere mortal hands. According to this expert, those horizontal striations are usually the result of a tool that takes breaks while removing material, leaving its mark on the surface. But wait, there's more. Imagine the tool being rocked back and forth against the trench walls, clearing away the waste to keep the trench from narrowing. Well, in that case, the tool might have left some funky horizontal striations where it was pressed against the sidewall. This sounds like some fancy technology at play, don't you think? And guess what? The dynastic Egyptians probably didn't have access to that kind of know-how. Another famous Egyptologist from way back also uncovered a bunch of core drills during his adventures. Although the actual drill bits are missing, his collection houses these particular core remnants made of limestone, alabaster, and even granite. These constructions aren't the only amazing thing the ancient Egyptians left behind, though. As it turns out, the Egyptians were the genius minds behind the creation of the handheld mirror. Yeah, that little mirror you use every day to check yourself out. But here's the twist. These mirrors are like pieces of art. They were decorated with inscriptions and figures. But that's not all. The Egyptians had a serious concern with their appearance. They knew the importance of personal hygiene and looking fabulous. So, in their quest for pearly whites, they invented toothbrushes and toothpaste. Dental problems were pretty common back then, and their smiles weren't exactly all white. Dentistry wasn't their strongest suit, you see. Maybe their minds were distracted by all that pyramid building. So that doesn't mean those ancient toothpaste recipes weren't amazing. One delightful concoction included rock salt, mint, dried iris petals, and pepper. Some brave dentists in the 21st century tried it out, and it worked pretty well. Ground-up ash was also used in another recipe to create a tooth cleansing paste. Mint was missing, so that didn't do much for their breath. That's when the genius Egyptians came up with the world's first breath mints. They made tablets from heated spices like cinnamon, and they mixed it with honey. Now, let's shift gears to home decor, Egyptian style. They surely took ornamentation to the next level. While the concept of decorating furniture started in Mesopotamia, the Egyptians cranked it up a notch. They went all out with different colors of ink and even developed various weights of paper. Oh, and let's not forget about those cute little area rugs we all have in our homes today. Guess who came up with the idea? Yep, the Egyptians. They used the versatile papyrus plant to make those cozy rugs. And speaking of trends, the Egyptians loved their knickknacks. They had an assortment of small figurines in the shapes of cats, dogs, and people. These statues were made from various materials, like simple sun-dried mud to the ultimate bling of gold. It all depended on how loaded you were. The Egyptians were also all about farming, and they knew that clean water was crucial for their crops and animals. That's why they came up with some nifty inventions and techniques to make sure their land was fertile and their plants were happy. First off, they had the genius idea of using ox-drawn plows. They had two types of plows, heavy and light. The heavy plow would strut its stuff, cutting deep furrows in the soil, while the lighter plow followed behind, fluffing up the earth. But they didn't stop there. After plowing, the Egyptians would break up clumps of soil and sow the rows with seeds. To give those seeds a good old squish into the furrows, they'd march their livestock across the field, effectively closing up the furrows. But hey, all that hard work would be pointless if their seeds were as dry as the Sahara. That's where irrigation comes into play. The Egyptians were so good at it that other cultures, like the Greeks and Romans, couldn't help but copy their techniques. Now let's switch gears and talk about the marvelous architecture of ancient Egypt. These folks weren't just skilled farmers, they were also architectural maestros. They built these fancy canals to carry water to farms and villages, and boy, did they know how to make those canals look pretty. Just imagine strolling along a canal lined with ornate structures. The pharaoh Ramesses the Great was quite the overachiever when it came to construction. One of his mind-blowing creations was the construction located at Abu Simbel. This building was designed so that twice a year, the sun would shine directly into it and illuminate the statues of Ramesses. And let's not forget about the corbelled arch. Without this architectural gem, we'd be missing out on some mind-boggling structures like the Great Pyramid. The Egyptians knew how to make things stand tall and proud, thanks to their engineering and construction wizardry. They built grand halls and inner sanctums that make your jaw drop. And some of these temples doubled as astronomical observatories. Most people know that pyramids were built as grand tombs for the pharaohs, designed to ensure they had a smooth journey to the afterlife. The Great Pyramid of Giza, for instance, was constructed for the pharaoh Khufu. But what most people don't know is that this whole pyramid building trend started right here with the step pyramid of Djoser about 4,700 years ago. This massive structure was built for Pharaoh Djoser, a ruler from Egypt's 3rd dynasty. It rises 7 layers high above the ground and stands about 200 feet tall. We think of it today as a phenomenal architectural project. But for ancient Egyptians, the step pyramid of Djoser turned out to be more like a massive experiment, a trial run, if you will, to perfect their building skills before they moved on to even more ambitious pyramids. Reaching new heights is super exciting, but the real mystery is what is going on below the ground. In this pyramid's underground labyrinth, there is a network of tunnels stretching about 3.5 miles long. And some researchers believe these tunnels might have been part of a sophisticated water system that could completely change what we think about pyramid construction. Let's talk about this massive complex located in Saqqara. Surrounding the pyramid, there's what's known as a dry moat, a continuous trench that is up to 164 feet wide and almost 2 miles long. It forms a sort of rectangular shape around the pyramid. This trench has an average depth of about 65 feet. Now, if you were to add up all the earth and rock they dug out to create this moat, it would be about 10 times the volume of the step pyramid itself. For the longest time, people just assumed this trench was nothing more than a huge quarry, a place where they dug up stone and clay to build the step pyramid. Makes sense, right? But when you take a closer look, it doesn't add up. The trench is too narrow and deep to be practical for mining, and its layout doesn't match anything we know about ancient Egyptian quarrying methods. Plus, some sections of the trench are actually covered with a rocky ceiling, which would have made it nearly impossible to use as a quarry. Another theory suggests that the dry moat had some kind of spiritual significance. Maybe it was a sacred place, where souls of nobles gathered to serve the late king in the afterlife. There are even niches in the walls that work as a hint at this spiritual function. But most researchers believe that this purpose likely developed much later, long after the complex was built for Djoser. So what was the moat really designed for? In 2020, a researcher came up with a pretty intriguing idea. It is possible that this trench was actually designed to collect and manage water, especially after heavy rainfalls. Now, that makes sense when you consider the location. The moat sits in an area that could easily have been flooded by runoff water from nearby plains. This could also explain why the trench wasn't used for new graves until much later when the climate became drier and less prone to flooding. The story becomes even more intriguing, as this trench appears to be part of a larger, more complex hydraulic system within the Djoser complex. It is like the trench has several compartments, carefully carved out of the rock and connected by tunnels. These compartments likely served as a part of a water treatment system, where water would flow from one compartment to the next, getting cleaner as it moved along. Now, here is where things start to tie into the pyramid itself. The Djoser complex has a series of underground shafts, and some researchers think that water from the moat's deep trench might have been used to power a hydraulic lift system. And this giant water-powered elevator could have been used to raise the heavy stones needed to build the pyramid. It worked like a volcano, but instead of lava, water did the heavy lifting. Imagine a big deep hole in the ground at the center of the pyramid site. Inside this hole, there was a huge wooden platform, kind of like a giant raft that could move up and down. When the workers wanted to lift a heavy stone, they would fill the hole with water. As the water rose, the wooden platform started to float up, carrying the stone with it, almost like a giant water-powered elevator. When the stone reached the right height, the workers slid it off the platform and onto the pyramid. The idea is that water from the deep trench, after being cleaned and filtered, would flow into these shafts. A massive float, possibly made of wood, would then rise as the water filled the shaft, lifting the stones up to where they were needed for construction. Once the stone was in place, they'd let the water out, lowering the platform back down to the bottom, ready to lift the next stone. This fancy hydraulic lift system could have been a game changer, making the whole building process a lot faster and more efficient without using a lot of workforce. It is like the ancient Egyptians were already embracing the whole idea of work smarter, not harder. But of course, not everyone is on board with this theory. Some experts argue that the area where the step pyramid of Djoser was built couldn't have held enough water from occasional rains to maintain such a fancy hydraulic system. The main theory suggests that, in the past, there might have been some kind of lake nearby that would have filled up after a period of rain, and this lake could have supplied water to the complex's hydraulic system. But there is no mention of such a lake in any ancient Egyptian writings, so it might be more of a what-if situation than a reality. And then there's the issue of the hard work itself. Remember when I said this method could have allowed the ancient builders to raise stones with far less effort? Well, that might not be entirely true. According to some experts, just building this hydraulic device would have required a lot more heavy work than simply moving the stone blocks using good old-fashioned manpower. And let's not forget, the step pyramid of Djoser is like a baby pyramid compared to those that came later. The stones used for Djoser's pyramid weighed, on average, about 660 pounds each, which is nothing compared to the more than 2.5-ton blocks used later for the pyramid of Chephren. If this cool water lift theory gets completely ruled out, we still need to explain how this pyramid was built in the first place. To answer that, we need to rewind a bit and talk about the original plans. See, before Djoser's tomb became a pyramid, the idea was to construct a simple mastaba. This type of tomb was pretty common in earlier periods, a flat-roofed, rectangular structure with sloping sides. But after the original mastaba was finished, they decided to expand it a bit, by adding more layers on top. And then they added even more layers, until the construction reached 6 distinctive steps, each one smaller than the previous. And they probably did all this by raising those heavy stones using ramps, not a water-powered elevator. There is still so much we don't know about the Step Pyramid of Djoser. More research is definitely needed to fully understand how this system worked, or if it even existed at all. But the idea of using water to help build the pyramid adds a whole new layer to our understanding of ancient Egyptian engineering. It's a powerful reminder of just how clever and resourceful those builders were, using the natural landscape and the power of water to create one of the most iconic monuments in history.
Whenever you hear about ancient ruins, you almost never picture them being suspended somewhere, or just randomly hanging on the branch of a tree, right? In fact, for most of the ancient artifacts we have exposed in museums all over the world, archaeologists did quite an impressive amount of digging. You see, buildings have this funny way of fading away over time if not properly taken care of. Sometimes we need to reuse some building materials, so an older construction may be sacrificed in the process. Other times houses are abandoned, and once they are exposed to the elements on the surface, like rain or sunlight, they don't really stand a chance. Some just simply crumble away due to good old erosion. So the only way a piece of architecture can survive the test of time is if it's somehow gotten buried deep down. Now, how did they end up buried in the first place? Well, it's quite the comedy of errors. Ancient cities had a habit of gradually raising their ground level like a kid adding toppings to their ice cream sundae. You see, these settlements were always busy collecting food and building materials to keep up with their ever-growing population. But hey, who has time to deal with waste and rubbish? It wasn't exactly high on their to-do list back in the day. So when it came to building new houses, ancient civilizations found it much easier to save their sweat and tears by piling up the rubble and constructing right on top. But that's not all. Rivers would also occasionally flood and deposit a layer of sediment on the city floors, further encapsulating those ancient constructions. And in those dry regions like the desert, where the wind likes to show off its sand and dust dance moves, you can bet it was a constant struggle to keep the establishments clean. One hilarious example is the Sphinx, which had its head buried in sand until a group of archaeologists unearthed it in 1817. Some ancient towns eventually got covered up because they were completely abandoned. With less human activity to control their expansion, plant seeds couldn't resist the opportunity and sprouted all over the place. They gobbled up carbon dioxide from the air and grew, adding more and more bulk to the ground. Those cheeky roots even decided to stabilize the soil made from decaying plant matter, creating layers upon layers of earthy goodness. It's like the ultimate DIY project Mother Nature embarked on, with plants as her loyal helpers. The act of digging into the secrets of ancient civilizations is not just about unearthing a lost world. It's also an epic quest to reveal the hidden treasures beneath layers of history. But how do archaeologists know where to dig in the first place? If everything is covered in layers upon layers of sediments, debris, and plant roots, they must have some sort of system they rely on before embarking on a new project, right? For starters, they're not always the ones suggesting an archaeological dig in a certain location. Let me explain. Let's say you're a contractor and you want to build a new fancy apartment complex in your city. Some local legislations have certain requirements before your project can start, though. For instance, before anyone starts building on a piece of land, they might need to bring in specialists to check the soil. These clever folks can be archaeologists, geologists, or paleontologists, and they need to keep an eye on things during development. If any artifacts or ecofacts, fancy word for organic remnants, are discovered, these experts swoop in to excavate and study them. But what about sites that have nothing to do with bulldozers and yellow hats? Archaeologists have more than one trick up their sleeves when it comes to locating ancient hotspots. They dive deep into historic records with a healthy dose of detective work. By sniffing out old documents and maps, they can piece together the puzzle of human activity in a specific area. If a site has been visited before, it's even better. Finding records of past excavations or historical accounts can give archaeologists lots of information on where to continue their treasure hunt. Before archaeologists start swinging their shovels, they engage in a bit of a visual scan mission. Armed with a grid system, They'll stroll around the site, keeping their eyes peeled for any artifacts that might be hiding just beneath the Earth's upper layer. From groundstone tools to historic glass and even ancient garbage dumps, yes, they're also valuable. These keen-eyed explorers can spot signs of human activity faster than most people. If they stumble upon midden soil, fancy term for a garbage dump, they know for sure that humans once called this place home. Archaeologists don't just rely on their trusty shovels, though. They have an arsenal of gadgets to aid in their search for hidden wonders. Geophysical tools are like their secret weapons. Take the resistivity meter, for example. This clever contraption measures the electrical component of the soil and any buried features or artifacts. A buried wall, for instance, will create a different resistivity reading than the surrounding soil. Magnetometers and ground-penetrating radar work in similar ways, showcasing potential hints of ancient treasures in the soil. And who could forget our trusty old friend, the GPS? It helps archaeologists map out precise locations, like a high-tech treasure map, leading them straight to their pot of gold. Care to virtually visit some of the most important archaeological sites in the world? Well, follow me. In the United Kingdom, for instance, you'll find this interesting place called Stonehenge. It's one of many henges scattered around, but this one really takes the cake. Picture this. Massive ancient stones standing tall and proud, arranged in a funky outer ring and an inner horseshoe, with some smaller stones thrown in for good measure. And guess what? These amazing stones have been around for over 5,000 years. Talk about a serious case of rock-solid longevity. Now, here's where it gets interesting. According to local folklore, the legendary wizard Merlin whipped out his magic wand and poof! He teleported these massive stones all the way from Ireland. Apparently, some giants had assembled them there, but Merlin decided they would look much better at their new location. Others think it's just the ruined remains of an old Roman spiritual edifice. These amazing structures were built by our Bronze Age ancestors. With their simple tools and limited tech, they managed to create this monumental masterpiece. Impressive, right? Unfortunately, there's still so much we don't know about this area. Stonehenge's initial purpose remains a mystery to this day. Sure, there are lots of theories, but scientists have yet to agree on the subject. However, we do know that it's perfectly aligned to catch the sunrise during the summer and winter solstices. The ancient city of Pompeii is an equally amazing archaeological site. Picture this. Mount Vesuvius, a notorious troublemaker, decided to throw a volcanic tantrum and completely covered this ancient Roman city. It turned it into a time capsule, located outside present-day Naples in Italy. Fast forward to the year 1748, when a bunch of adventurous explorers stumbled upon Pompeii. Lo and behold, they discovered a treasure trove of well-preserved goodies. Streets, houses, food. Probably a bit stale by then. Blingy jewelry, fancy sculptures, colorful frescoes, everyday household items, and even animal and human remains. It was like an epic archaeological party. From the looks of it, Pompeii had it all. Fancy houses and villas, a massive 20,000-seat arena, cute little artisan shops, hangouts like taverns. And let's not forget the saucy spots like those luxurious bathhouses for some intense pampering. There's also the Sanctuary of Apollo, where people used to gather for their daily dose of worship. And of course, the bustling heart of the city, the Forum of Pompeii, where all the cool people used to hang out. And guess what? Pompeii is so cool that it made it to UNESCO's World Heritage List back in 1997. That's like the ultimate Hall of Fame for historical awesomeness. It also includes many other famous buildings and sites, like the Taj Mahal in India and the Acropolis of Athens in Greece. During the early 1920s, the world was mesmerized by King Tut. A British archaeologist, Howard Carter, discovered the young pharaoh's tomb in Egypt's Valley of the Kings, 1922. But the public wasn't only interested in gold and jewelry. The press wrote about the curse of the pharaohs, but was it true? Was an ancient curse really the reason everyone entering the pyramids lost their lives? At the time, this was the only explanation for a series of unexplained passings. The man present at the opening of King Tut's burial chamber, George Herbert V, Earl of Carnarvon, lived only 5 more months after the discovery. He had also sponsored the dig. In comes Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. You probably know of him, the English writer behind Sherlock Holmes. He claimed that an evil elemental caused the explorer's demise. He must have been joking, right? Unfortunately, no. The newspapers continued to blame the pharaoh's curse after every Egyptologist left this world. These are the scientists who study the ancient cultures of Egypt. The archaeologist who opened King Tutankhamun's tomb passed away full 17 years after the discovery. The reason for it wasn't a secret: Hodgkin's disease. Yet again, journalists around the world wrote of a curse. This was getting ridiculous. But science must have had a rational explanation, right? Well, it did. And that explanation was common mold. Harmful fungi, Aspergillus, can survive for ages in sealed tombs. When humans inhale them, there's a high risk of infection in people who have a weakened immune system. Today, doctors believe this is what happened to the unfortunate explorer more than a century ago. Scientists now know that this type of fungi grows especially well on grain. And King Tut's tomb was full of offerings in the form of baskets full of raw grain and bread. Researchers discovered other varieties of fungi on ancient Egyptian mummies. These molds can easily cause some nasty consequences for humans. The danger of rotting organic material is real. Just look inside your fridge. Any food leftovers you have there start to go off after just 3 to 4 days. You can imagine what happens to food in a sealed chamber after thousands of years. Food is just one kind of organic material. There is also wood. If you expose it to water or even moisture in the air, it starts to deteriorate. You don't have to travel to Egypt to see the effects of this process. Any abandoned building in your neighborhood can serve as an example. When a piece of wood gets wet and has no way of drying out, there is going to be damage. From fungi to wood-boring insects, the list is long. Rotten wood presents a huge structural issue. Beams and floor panels are all made of timber, so you better not go inside a failing building. You can easily lose your footing. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. The building materials since the time of the pharaohs have changed, but so have the dangers. One of the best examples is asbestos. Until the 1970s, most home insulation materials contained this substance. It was in everything, from boilers to soundproofing. This microfiber provided excellent heat insulation. But then, the United States banned asbestos in 1989. The UK did the same a decade later. The reason for it is that asbestos becomes a health hazard when it gets damaged. When humans inhale asbestos fibers, they can get seriously sick. Abandoned strictures are full of this material, and there is no one to maintain them. You see the danger now. Another material is also common in old buildings: lead. Ancient Romans used lead piping to channel spring water into their homes. They also cooked in lead vessels, which was probably not the wisest of choices. You see, lead and water don't go well together because of something called corrosion. But this problem isn't ancient. US officials banned lead piping only in 1986. That means that 7% of American households still have lead service lines. And this is not the only source of poisoning. Until the mid-1960s, builders used lead paint to coat woodwork. In abandoned buildings, this lead coating snapped a long time ago. Anyone who touches doors and windows will disturb this lead dust and inhale it. The dust particles are at least visible to an unaided eye. This is not the case for carbon monoxide. This gas has no color, so you can't see it. It has no odor, so you can't smell it. No way to detect a carbon monoxide leak at all. And how does this dangerous gas usually escape? Poor maintenance. Well, abandoned buildings have zero maintenance. 1 second, you could be exploring an old factory, and the next you could feel dizzy with and have a terrible headache. These are just some of the symptoms of CO poisoning, the less severe ones. But what is the source? All it takes is for an old boiler to finally give way after years of neglect. We've reached an important question. What is the main factor in air quality inside a room? If you are thinking the level of oxygen, try again. It turns out that oxygen levels drop by only 0.3% in 8 hours inside an airtight room. This is a room in which doors and windows are sealed with tape, so the decrease is even smaller in normal conditions. Oxygen isn't the main problem. The levels of carbon dioxide rise sharply inside a sealed room. This is the direct result of human breathing. We inhale oxygen and exhale CO2. Think of it as a waste gas. Normally, it's only a tiny portion of the air we breathe, 0.04%. But in a sealed room, high levels of carbon dioxide will make you feel drowsy. And that's the last thing you need when inside a dilapidated building. Carbon dioxide will decrease your ability to think clearly. Researchers from Harvard did an interesting study in 2016. They had office workers come in 6 days in a row to complete a problem-solving test. During the week, they gradually raised the carbon dioxide levels in the mock-up office. The results of the same test kept getting worse over time. There are many factors at play, but CO2 levels definitely had an impact on the workers' problem-solving ability. The test took place inside a typical office environment, not inside a crumbling building where visitors must watch their every step. When I say visitors, I really mean trespassers, and trespassing is a criminal offense in the United States. This goes both for private and public property. If you defy the law, you can be fined up to $5,000 or even face lockup time. That should make you think twice before jumping over a fence with a no trespassing sign. But again, you might not be the only one inside. You can never know who else is in the building. Perhaps a person up to no good? It doesn't have to be a person at all. Animals can pose a threat as well. You would be startled if you saw a rat, for example. But the poor animal would be scared as well. It might bite you. The list of diseases rats carry is pretty long. But rodents' teeth can cause other forms of damage. They grow constantly, so the animal has to constantly nibble on something to stop them from overgrowing. If you ever felt peckish at 1 a.m., you know the feeling. Electric cables are high on the rodents' menu. Abandoned buildings have plenty of those. Old wiring is dangerous on its own. Structures erected before 1984 often used wires made out of aluminum. Today, copper is the standard because an aluminum wire is 55 times more likely to catch on fire than a copper one. Flipping a switch in a rundown building can cost you your life. Be on alert for telltale signs that something is wrong. Lights that flicker, sparks from sockets, and the smell of smoke. And yeah, don't count on an earth cable to protect you from electrocution. Ground cables became standard only in the 1960s.
Miles and miles of yellow sand, treeless mountain ridges, and scorching hot sun over your head. And suddenly, something you'd never expect to come across in a barren desert. A small group of overexcited people. They're as happy as you would be if you'd won a lottery. They've just found an ancient tomb, once flooded with its walls in bad shape. But the stuff they discovered inside proves that this is the burial site of one of Egypt's most mysterious pharaohs. Historians have been hunting for his tomb for years, but no one expected it to hide ancient treasures. Fast forward. After careful examination of the site, Egyptian officials have announced the discovery of the tomb of King Thutmos II. It's the last missing tomb from Egypt's 18th dynasty. And this is also the first royal tomb found since King Tutankhamun's was discovered in 1922, in more than 100 years. A team of Egyptian and British archaeologists found the tomb in the Theban Mountains area, west of Luxor, near the famous Valley of the Kings. Before this, the site was only known as Tomb C4, but during their excavation, the team found clear evidence proving it belonged to King Thutmos II. Archaeologists actually found the entrance and main tunnel leading to the tomb in 2022. But at first, they thought it belonged to a queen because it was near the graves of Thutmos III's wives. It was also close to Queen Hatshepsut's tomb. Originally, it was prepared for her when she was just a royal wife. But everything changed when she became pharaoh. But we'll talk about this twist of fate a little later. But soon they realized that their discovery was much more significant. They found alabaster jars with Thutmos II's name and the words "deceased king" written on them. That's when they realized that the tomb was actually his final resting place. Sadly, Thutmos II's tomb has seen better days. According to the head of Egypt's antiquities sector and the leader of the Egyptian excavation team, the tomb suffered major damage from ancient floods not long after the pharaoh's death. Water swept through the burial chamber, likely destroying or displacing many of the original artifacts. Much of what had been once inside the tomb was moved elsewhere in an attempt to salvage it. The researchers found out that the tomb had a basic design, with an entrance, a sloping main corridor, and a burial chamber. The corridor was coated in white plaster and rose about 4.5 feet above the floor of the burial chamber. A large staircase and a very large descending corridor of the tomb indicated its grandeur. It took the team a long time to navigate through, though, as the tomb was blocked by flood debris and collapsed ceilings. Only after crawling through a 32-foot passageway with a small 16-inch gap at the top, the worst nightmare for those of us with claustrophobia, were they able to reach the burial chamber. There, they were in for another surprise. They cleared the debris, expecting to find the crushed remains of a burial beneath. But the tomb turned out to be completely empty, and it was not due to robbery. It had been deliberately emptied. The researchers soon realized that the tomb had been flooded since it had been built underneath a waterfall. It happened just a few years after the king's burial, so the contents of the tomb were moved to another location. That's why there was a second corridor in the tomb. It was most likely made to help remove King Thutmos II's body from his flooded tomb. Despite the damage, the excavation team made some really exciting discoveries. They found traces of mortar decorated with blue inscriptions, yellow stars, and fragments from the Book of Amduat, one of the most significant funerary texts in ancient Egypt. The book was meant to guide the deceased through the underworld, ensuring a safe journey to the afterlife. Now, how about we sneak a peek at ancient Egypt's 18th dynasty? It was all about conquering lands, expanding the empire, and building jaw-dropping monuments. Some of the biggest names from that era, Thutmos I and Thutmos III, both legendary warrior kings who left their mark in history. Thutmos I was a fierce fighter who led major military campaigns, pushing Egypt's border further south than ever before, all the way to the fourth cataract of the Nile. His victories gave Egypt access to new trade routes, stronger political ties, and more wealth. His conquests were so significant that they were recorded in the tombs of his top officials. Thutmos III, sometimes called Thutmos the Great, took things even further. He was not only an incredible military strategist, but also the commander of Pharaoh Hatshepsut's armies before becoming king himself. He led between 17 and 20 military campaigns, winning every single one and expanding Egypt's empire to its peak. He even created the world's first navy. Thutmos III is often remembered as Egypt's greatest warrior pharaoh. And sandwiched between these two powerhouses was Thutmos II, a pharaoh who doesn't get nearly as much attention. Hey, the middle child, right? His reign lasted only about 5 years before he passed away at around age 30 in 1479 BCE. He is kind of a mystery. No one really knows what he accomplished. For the longest time, even the location of his burial site was totally unknown. His body was actually found in the 19th century. It was just lying around in the mortuary temple of Deir el-Bahari, in a secret chamber where priests used to hide royal mummies centuries after their original tombs were looted by grave robbers. In other words, Thutmos II's body must have been moved from his original resting place at some point in history to protect it. During his lifetime, Thutmos II made at least one major impact on Egyptian history. He married his half-sister Hatshepsut. That might not sound like a big deal, but it helped her become Egypt's greatest female pharaoh after he passed. The catch? She kept her stepson, Thutmos III, off the throne for decades. When he finally took power, he erased her name from history out of spite. And still, Hatshepsut is one of Egypt's greatest pharaohs, no matter if you're talking about a man or a woman. She brought a lot of wealth and art to Egypt. She led a big trading trip to a place called Punt, where she brought back things like gold, ebony, and incense. She also made sure her name lasted by building amazing structures that we can still see today. At Karnak, she added huge obelisks. One of them is still standing tall. She also was the one to build the Temple of Deir el-Bahari with its countless columns. She was buried there. Interestingly, Hatshepsut was often shown in art as a man, with muscles and a beard, like how pharaohs were usually depicted. But she made sure there was always something in the artwork that reminded people she was a woman, like calling herself Daughter of Re, or His Majesty herself. When she passed away in 1458 BCE, Egypt wouldn't have a female ruler as powerful as her until Cleopatra, about 1400 years later. According to Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities Secretary General, isn't that a mouthful? Hatshepsut's name actually appears in Thutmos II's tomb, meaning she might have even handled his burial. As for their final resting places, well, Hatshepsut was buried in the Valley of the Kings, and Thutmos II's mummy is now in the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization, alongside other ancient Egyptian rulers. It gives visitors a rare chance to see the remains of a nearly forgotten pharaoh. Now, experts consider the discovery of his tomb to be one of the most significant in recent years. The artifacts found there add important details to our understanding of the history of the region and Thutmos II's rule. And even though the tomb's design is fairly simple and follows the same architectural style preferred by later Egyptian rulers, its historical importance is undeniable. In any case, the mission isn't over yet. Archaeologists are now focusing on solving another mystery. Where did the rest of the tomb's contents end up? The team is determined to continue their search. Who knows what other secrets they will uncover that have remained hidden beneath the sands for thousands of years.
In 1850, French scientist Auguste Mariette went to Egypt looking for manuscripts, but accidentally found a head of a sphinx sticking out of the dunes. He cleared the sand and figured out the sphinx was guiding the entrance to some underground construction. Several months later, he finally entered the Serapeum of Saqqara. Inside, he found an enormous granite sarcophagi with remnants of 64 bulls. Scientists are still amazed by the tech that the ancient Egyptians used to transport those enormous boxes. The Serapeum was built around the year 3000 before the Common Era. It was an underground tomb built to honor the sacred Apis bulls of ancient Egypt. It had a long hallway, almost 500 feet long, with giant stone rooms on both sides. Some of the sarcophagi weighed as much as 50 average cars, and all of them were made with super precision, with exact 90-degree angles. These sarcophagi were beautifully decorated with hieroglyphs and carvings that told stories about the lives and importance of the Apis bulls. Now, there are 24 sarcophagi left. In ancient Egypt, Apis bulls were very special animals connected to the deity Ptah. They thought the bulls carried Ptah's spirit and wisdom, helped the pharaoh, and protected the Egyptians. Priests looked for special markings on young bulls to find Apis bulls. It could be a white triangle on its forehead, which symbolized divine light, a shape on its back like a vulture's wing, and a scarab shape under its tongue, which stood for rebirth. If a bull had these signs, they believed it was chosen by Ptah and treated it like royalty. The chosen bulls lived in a special temple in Memphis, the city where they worshipped Ptah. They received the best care and offerings from visitors who wanted their blessings. When an Apis bull passed away, it was treated with great honor and mummified. When Mariette entered the Serapeum, he noticed traces of rollers on the gallery's floor and found 2 wooden horizontal winches. Each had 8 levers. Later, other explorers saw double rails. The burial chambers were lower than the hallway floor. To get the boxes into place, workers filled the chambers with sand so the sarcophagi could be rolled in straight. Then they slowly removed the sand to gently lower the boxes into perfectly cut spaces in the bedrock. A carved stone sign found in the Serapeum said it took 28 days to move just one sarcophagus and its lid into its spot during the time of Ptolemy II. The extreme precision of the sarcophagi with 90-degree angles also has an explanation. Ancient Egyptians wrote texts, or rather, papyrus, on geometry a long time ago. It shows that they knew the approximate number pi and could calculate the volume of a pyramid with its top cut off. If they could figure out complicated math like that back then, it makes sense that they could also carve perfectly flat surfaces 500 years later. All this sounds pretty legit, but some people think certain things don't add up here. The size of boxes is way larger than the size of bulls, yet they buried pharaohs in tiny coffins that barely fit their bodies. The sarcophagi are made out of granite with crazy precision, and they could have just used limestone, which would have made things way easier. The transportation of the boxes seems pretty simple, but only in theory. If one person could pull about 440 pounds, then at least 250 people would be needed to pull just one box. The tunnels in the Serapeum are really narrow, only about 2 feet wider than the boxes themselves. There's no way hundreds of people could have squeezed into those tight spaces to pull the boxes. And even if they did, how would they turn the box in the cramped corridor, lower it into its niche, and place it perfectly in the middle? Somehow, they did this 24 times, and every box is centered perfectly. Plus, the chambers were dusty, and there were no signs of soot from lamps. This means they must have worked in almost complete darkness. The real use of the boxes could also be different. A long time ago, even before the Egyptian pharaohs ruled, the local people already knew how to use fermentation. It happens when tiny organisms called yeast eat certain ingredients like starch and turn them into gas and ethanol. So someone in ancient Egypt probably put food like barley, bread, and even meat inside a giant stone box, then closed it tight with a heavy lid. These stone boxes, carved from granite, were so precisely made that they were almost completely sealed, so nothing could escape from it. As the yeast inside the box started working, it created more and more CO2 gas. It built up pressure inside the box. The granite boxes were incredibly strong. They could handle more pressure than a car tire can hold. When granite was squeezed under such pressure, its crystals produced a tiny electric charge. This effect was possible because granite contains quartz, a material that reacts to pressure this way. The process also needed meat or animal parts, possibly to help the yeast grow better. Meat contains something called oleic acid, which yeast needs to keep growing and to survive the bad effects of the ethanol it produces. As the pressure inside the box kept growing, the combination of gases and electricity made these boxes not just ancient fridges, but powerful energy systems. Over time, the pressure inside got so strong that it could push the lid open and the gas would escape with a pop. But when people rediscovered the Serapeum in 1850, they found old drawings that showed piles of stones stacked on top of some of the box lids. So, someone long ago probably tried to make the lids even heavier by adding extra weight to make it harder for the gas pressure to push them open. This extra weight also meant the quartz crystals in the granite could keep creating more electricity under all that pressure. If someone opened one of these stone boxes thousands of years later, they would only find bones from bulls that were placed in the box. And that's exactly what Mariette discovered in the 1850s. They opened the Serapeum for visitors soon after the first excavations in the second half of the 19th century. Prince of Wales even had a luncheon with his guests in one of the sarcophagi. Sands and earthquakes made the site inaccessible for a while, but now you can visit it again and try to solve the mystery yourself. With new tech, we could have answers to many other historical mysteries soon. A team of scientists at Chicago's Field Museum of Natural History recently used a special CT scanner to learn more about ancient Egyptian mummies without unwrapping them. They gently rolled 26 mummies on custom carts out to the parking lot, where the scanner was waiting. It took thousands of detailed X-ray pictures of each mummy and their coffins. When all the pictures were put together, they created 3D images that showed what was inside, the skeletons, and some artifacts. The scientists hope these images will help them understand ancient Egyptian burial practices from over 3,000 years ago. Even though the scanning process only took 4 days, it might take 3 years to study all the data. But scientists were able to learn some personal details about the mummies. One of the most popular mummified individuals at the museum, Lady Chineta, was a woman who lived in ancient Egypt about 3,000 years ago. It looks like she passed away in her late 30s or early 40s. To make sure her body looked complete for the afterlife, embalmers put stuffing in her neck to keep it from collapsing. They also placed artificial eyes in her sockets, so she would have eyes in the next world. She was wrapped in fancy linen and placed in a beautifully decorated coffin. The scans revealed that it had been carefully crafted with a slit at the back, which embalmers used to fit the body. There were also some artistic details on the surface, like markings for her knees. It looks like her burial was on the scale of a high-end luxury car. There are mysterious plasma bubbles floating around the pyramids of Giza. As bizarre as that might sound, let's get one thing clear right off the bat. There's nothing extraterrestrial going on here. Plasma bubbles are those weather anomalies that form in a layer of Earth's atmosphere called the ionosphere. This is an invisible layer surrounding our planet that stretches roughly from 50 to 400 miles above Earth's surface, right at the edge of space. In this layer, the sun, being the giant hot power that it is, basically cooks gases, splitting them into electrically charged particles called plasma. Here's where it gets interesting. At night, especially near the equator, these charged particles get disturbed, and when a bunch of them suddenly vanish at the same time, it forms what we call a plasma bubble. Imagine it like a big empty pocket where the plasma is missing or its quantity is lowered, but it's only considered a plasma bubble if this phenomenon occurs on a large scale, typically around 62 miles in size. If you're already packing your suitcase for Egypt and have put binoculars to look at the tips of the pyramids, I'm sorry to say that we can't see these plasma bubbles with the unaided eye. It's all happening way above our heads, completely invisible to us. Scientists need to use special equipment, like the Latitude Long-Range Ionosphere Radar, or LARID, to detect these bubbles. This advanced technology helps researchers track and observe the movement and formation of plasma bubbles in real time. This formation, by the way, can be triggered by solar storms. That brings us to November 2023, when an impressive solar storm occurred. On a scale from 1 to 5, this one was classified as a G3, which is considered a strong event. Solar storms occur when sunspots are basically cooler, darker areas on the sun's surface, release bursts of energy into space. These flares triggered several geomagnetic storms on Earth. While this might sound like doomsday stuff, it didn't disrupt our daily lives too much. In fact, it was great news for skywatchers, since the solar storm created stunning auroras, with the northern lights visible as far south as Greece and Turkey. But this particular storm in 2023 also had another interesting consequence. It caused the largest plasma bubble ever recorded by the Chinese radar. This phenomenon was so massive that it covered regions as far apart as the Egyptian pyramids and the Midway Islands in the Pacific Ocean. Now that's a huge distance, and it is a big deal for science. And that's because plasma bubbles are a growing threat to modern technology. Experts say they can disrupt satellite communications and GPS systems. So if you're using Google Maps or Waze and suddenly it can't figure out where you are, a plasma bubble might be to blame. Great, we now know what's going on with those bubbles detected above the pyramids of Giza. But things get even weirder inside this ancient construction. Apparently, the Great Pyramid of Giza has the ability to concentrate electromagnetic energy within its interior. A couple of years ago, a group of researchers decided to see what would happen if they took this ancient architecture and hit it with radio waves. I mean, waves that are similar to the kind your phone uses, but on a much larger scale, up to 1,900 feet long. But since they couldn't just start blasting radio waves at the actual pyramid, they did the next best thing: computer modeling. Using these simulations, the researchers discovered something incredible. The Great Pyramid can actually concentrate electromagnetic energy within its internal chambers, as well as underneath its base, where an unfinished chamber is located. By concentrate, I mean something like trap it. For example, when you shout into a cave, you hear your voice echo back, right? The sound waves don't just disappear, they bounce around and get focused. Similarly, when radio waves hit the pyramid, they don't just pass through or around it. Instead, they get absorbed, bounce around, and focus inside and underneath the pyramid. Our list of mysterious phenomena surrounding the Egyptian pyramids doesn't end there. Inside the pyramid, there's a long, narrow passage that leads to what's known as the King's Chamber. This room sits at the center of the pyramid, and it's believed to have been the final resting place of Pharaoh Khufu, the ancient Egyptian leader who commissioned the entire thing over 4,000 years ago. When visitors step into the King's Chamber, two things normally strike them: the room's incredible acoustics and its heavy, imposing structure, which is entirely lined with red granite. Recently, scientists have started to connect these two facts. Some researchers now believe that the king's chamber might be able to catch or pick up sound energy generated from other parts of the pyramid. In other words, this room might have been designed to amplify sound in a way that no other chamber in the pyramid can. To test this theory, researchers conducted an experiment where they sang in the Queen's chamber, which is located directly below the King's chamber. Here's where it gets wild. The music couldn't be heard in the lower underground rooms of the pyramid, but it sounded loud and clear in the King's chamber. One possible explanation for this is the type of stone used in the King's chamber: pink granite. Granite is known for its piezoelectric properties, meaning it can absorb energy from its surroundings, like sound vibrations, and convert it into electrical energy. This suggests that the chamber's unique acoustics might be due to more than just the shape of the room. It could be that the granite itself plays a role in amplifying and concentrating sound waves. According to scientists, these discoveries open up a whole new field of research into the pyramid's potential. Could the ancient pyramids have somehow harnessed the energy created by sound waves, or even Earth's natural vibrations? It might sound far-fetched, but considering the granite's piezoelectric properties are well documented in modern science, it's not entirely impossible. Who knows? Maybe we've only just scratched the surface of what the pyramids were truly capable of. Speaking of just scratching the surface, there's even more to think about, like how the pyramids ended up in such a perfect location. It seems the builders lined up the Great Pyramid with the cardinal points, meaning its sides are almost perfectly aligned with the four main directions: north, south, east, and west. There are many theories about how they did it, but one study suggests that Egyptians might have used the fall equinox to achieve this perfect alignment. During the equinox, the sun rises and sets directly in the east and west. It probably made it easier for builders to use the sun's position as a guide. By watching the sun during this time, they could make sure the pyramids were positioned just right. If we think about all these strange things about the pyramids, I mean, their perfect alignment, the ability to concentrate radio waves, and the materials used in the chambers that might generate electrical energy, could the real purpose of the pyramids actually be much more complex than just being tombs? Well, Nikola Tesla thought so. It is said that the famous inventor and engineer was kind of obsessed with the Egyptian pyramids, and he wondered if they might actually be giant energy transmitters. He believed the shape and position of the pyramids could help them function as huge generators, capable of producing free, limitless energy. Some researchers agree with Tesla and believe that these massive monuments might have been designed as giant power plants. According to their theory, builders could have figured out how to move ions, those electrically charged particles in the atmosphere, by placing materials like copper, gold, and silver around the pyramids. So, it's definitely possible that the ancient Egyptians created a sustainable, renewable power source. Although this is a very interesting thought, we haven't been able to confirm this theory, and the true purpose of the pyramids remain one of humanity's biggest mysteries.
We know that the ancient Egyptians were talented enough to build something as grand as the pyramids, but were they also smart enough to measure the speed of light? There's a theory circulating online that says exactly that. If you look at these two numbers, you'll see that they match completely. The first one is the speed of light in a vacuum measured in meters, and the second one is the latitude of the Great Pyramid of Giza. So, was it done on purpose, or is it just a coincidence? Well, happily, we can tell you that it's actually just a coincidence, not another conspiracy thingy. The Great Pyramid is just one of the many places in the world that share the same latitude. And more importantly, even if the ancient Egyptians had somehow measured the speed of light and chosen to keep it a secret from the rest of the world, they wouldn't have used meters to put it down. Meters were only defined at the end of the 18th century. The builders of the pyramids used a different unit of measure called cubits. 1 cubit is equal to 1.5 feet. Cubit was based on the length of the arm from the elbow to the tip of the middle finger, and it became popular in the ancient world. So if they wanted to impress the rest of the world and set the pyramids at a point that matched the speed of light in cubits, they would have to build their iconic constructions somewhere in Europe. And then the Danish astronomer who first measured the speed of light in 1676 would have been really upset to know that someone had done it centuries before him. So although they were ahead of their time in many aspects, the ancient Egyptians never measured the speed of light or used longitude and latitude to map their locations. The base of the Great Pyramid of Giza might seem like a perfect square, but it's actually an 8-sided structure, not 4-sided. Each of its 4 sides has a subtle concave indentation that splits it evenly from base to tip. The official version is that a British pilot was the first to notice it in 1940 while flying over the pyramid. He took a photograph that showed shadows highlighting these indentations. Some people think these lines are only visible from above and can best be seen at dawn and dusk during the spring and autumn equinoxes. This has led to a freaky theory that the ancient Egyptians might have designed the pyramids to communicate with something looking at them from above. Now, the Great Pyramid is one of only 3 pyramids that used to have a swivel door. It weighed around 20 tons, but they could still easily open it from the inside. Its precise fit made it nearly invisible from the outside, with no visible latch or handle. There were only slight variations in the exterior stone that gave out an opening. The other 2 pyramids with similar doors belonged to Khufu's father and grandfather. The Great Pyramid also has a hidden void at least 100 feet long that was only found in 2017. We still don't know what lies within the space, what purpose it served, or if it is the only space of its kind. Researchers used the same tech to see through cathedral walls, Mayan pyramids, and even volcanoes. It depends on a natural shower of subatomic particles called muons. They pass more easily through empty space than through solid materials. So if they arrange multiple muon detectors around a structure, scientists can map out its solid and empty areas. A team of scientists placed muon detectors inside the Great Pyramid and allowed them to gather data for months. Scientists have analyzed samples of the mortar used to build the pyramids many times. Although we know its composition, modern technology still can't replicate it. The mortar is mostly made from processed gypsum, but it wasn't used like the cement we use for bricks today. Instead, they used it to support the joints between the massive stones as they were set in place. The estimated amount they needed to construct the Great Pyramid was around 500,000 tons of mortar. The gypsum mortar is stronger than the stones themselves and has held up for thousands of years. Now, all 4 sides of the Great Pyramid are aligned with the cardinal points – north, south, east, and west. According to geologist and engineer Glenn Dash, the alignment is accurate to within 4 minutes of arc, or 1/15th of a degree. The architects managed to achieve this without modern tools like drones, blueprints, or computers. Many researchers try to explain this construction miracle. Maybe they used the pole star or the sun's shadow. Dash recently proposed a new, simpler idea. The Egyptians might have used the autumnal equinox to align the pyramids. It happens twice a year when the Earth's equator passes through the center of the sun's disk, making day and night nearly equal in length. To test his theory, Dash conducted an experiment on the 22nd of September 2016, the first day of the fall equinox. He used a special rod the Egyptians had to cast a shadow and tracked its tip at regular intervals, forming a smooth curve. By connecting 2 points of the curve with a taut string, he created an almost perfect east-west line. Dash noted that on the equinox, the shadow's tip runs in a straight line, nearly perfectly east-west, and with a slight counterclockwise error. There's a similar error in the pyramids. Although his experiment was conducted in Connecticut, Dash believes that the same method would work in Egypt. All the ancient Egyptians needed was a clear, sunny day. They could determine the fall equinox by counting 91 days from the summer solstice. But they left us few clues, and no engineering documents or architectural plans have been found that explain their methods. So they might have mapped shadows, but it's not definite. Now, scientists have long wondered how heavy stone blocks were carried to the pyramid sites, and they might finally have an answer. A research team from the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, has discovered that 31 pyramids are likely to have been built along a long-lost ancient branch of the River Nile. It's now hidden under desert and farmland. For many years, archaeologists have thought that ancient Egyptians must have used a nearby waterway to transport materials, equipment, people, and whatever else they needed to build the pyramids on the river. But up until now, they weren't certain of the location, shape, size, or proximity of this waterway to the site of the pyramids. The group of researchers used radar satellite imagery, historical maps, geophysical surveys, and sediment coring to map the river branch. They believe it was buried by a major drought and sandstorms thousands of years ago. The team managed to go below the sand surface and get images of some hidden features thanks to radar technology. They found hidden rivers and ancient structures running at the foothills of where most of the ancient Egyptian pyramids lie. The discovery of this extinct river branch helps explain the high pyramid density between Giza and Lisht, in what is now an inhospitable area of the Sahara Desert. Now, Egypt isn't the only country with the most pyramids in the world. The champion's title here goes to its southern neighbor, Sudan. It has between 200 and 255 pyramids, compared to Egypt's measly 138. They were built by members of the Kingdom of Kush, an ancient civilization that ruled the lands along the Nile River many years ago. They started erecting pyramids around 500 years after the Egyptians had stopped doing it. Their pyramids are much smaller than the Egyptian ones, but were built for the same purposes. Archaeologists are still working to find out how the pyramids in the Sudan were built, how long it took to complete them, and what happened to their society.
Imagine you were chosen to answer one of history's most important questions. What was the first civilization on Earth? The job description is simple, yet the task is extremely challenging. You need to unearth the proof of the world's first official civilization. Was it the Sumerians in Old Mesopotamia? Or was it the ancient Egyptians spread out along the Nile River? Not to make you nervous or anything, but history is quite literally in your hands. Good luck! Since you can't turn back the clock and visit Old Mesopotamia to get the answers to your questions, you'll need to research museum databases in order to get some clues. First things first, we need a definition of what is considered a civilization. It's not just thousands of people grouped together and living harmoniously. There are some key elements that together make a group of people a civilization. Like, for example, the domain of urbanism, aka city building, irrigation systems, and writing. You decide to begin your search by diving deep into the history of the Sumerians, which today hold the position of the world's first civilization. Now, imagine being the first of your kind. This means having no external examples. Rather, it means starting from scratch. First thing you'll need? A piece of land. And since there were no active water companies in the world at that time, you'll need a piece of land with easy access to water. So, the Sumerians settled between two major rivers, known as the Euphrates and the Tigris in southern Mesopotamia around 5000 BCE. Fun fact, Mesopotamia translates to the land between two rivers. On a modern-day map, it's more or less where Iraq is situated today. Together with land, a civilization needs ways to get food. The Sumer civilization had to face a dry and hot climate, but they managed to make agriculture thrive in the region. By diverting river waters and creating reservoirs and dams, the Sumerians allowed for a series of settlements to emerge across Mesopotamian plains. The famous city of Babylon was one of them. You know, the city that supposedly had those hanging gardens? I say supposedly because no definitive proof of the real existence of this monument has ever been found. However, it was considered one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and cited as a remarkable feat of engineering in an ancient book published around 290 BCE. Although no record was found of the Gardens of Babylon, the Sumerians were recognized as extremely skilled builders. Their cities were filled with mud brick constructions, and the most impressive ones were known as ziggurats, stepped pyramids that were built for spiritual purposes. The Sumerians built a trade network to supplement scarce resources and started to exchange goods with civilizations rising nearby, like Anatolia and Egypt. The beginning of trade was what drove the Sumerians to develop what is believed to be the world's first writing system. It began as a simple system, likely dating back to 3400 BCE. In this system, each syllable was represented with a drawing. Later, it gradually evolved into a fully formed cursive writing system. Don't believe me? Take a look at this piece from the Babylonian times. This huge basalt plaque is called the Hammurabi Code. It's known to be humanity's first collection of written laws. As far as the story goes, it was carved in volcanic stone around year 1760 BCE. Look at the precision of these carvings. It's quite astonishing. But the content is also surprising, since these 282 rules vary from commercial regulations to strict laws of justice. The thing is, historians don't have a consensus on whether the Sumerians were really the first ones to invent writing. Some think it might have been old Egyptians. Let's pause here. Ancient Egyptian settlements are believed to have started around the year 5500 BCE, which is earlier than the Sumer civilization. But remember I said a civilization needed a few things before it was considered as such. Ancient Egypt consisted of several smaller city-states, such as Memphis, Abydos, and Thebes, spreading out along the Nile River. It wasn't until 3000 BCE that Egypt was unified under one kingdom and lasted as an empire until nearly 1000 BCE. Although there is no consensus on this, some Egypt experts believed that it could have been Sumerian immigrants that founded early Egyptian settlements. The proof could be the presence of cylinder seals made of hard stone, something that was widely used in Sumer. These seals were used to guarantee authenticity in legal transactions, but it's hard to say whether this method was introduced by Sumerian immigrants or simply by trade. Since the time period is not one of the criteria we can use to determine who came first, we'll have to turn to something else. But what? Like the Sumerians, the Egyptians were also highly skilled builders. Duh, they built the famous Giza pyramids and many others all over their territory. In order to enhance their building techniques, they delved into developing a more profound understanding of mathematics. They developed a new form of measurement called the cubit, which was the equivalent of an arm's length. The Great Pyramid, for instance, is 440 cubits per 440 cubits. They were also innovative astronomers, combining their mathematical skills with attentive astronomical observation. They were the first civilization to use a 24-hour division of the day. And they even created a solar calendar, which was the first dating system in history to feature 365 days in one year. Okay, it's undeniable how impressive they were. But some experts say that the dispute has to be settled through the comparison of their writing systems. Hieroglyphic writing, the first Egyptian style of writing, is said to date back to 3000 BCE. It was a composition of over 700 symbols, which were carved in stone. For a long time, researchers believed that the Sumerian writing had come before Egyptian, but in a recent discovery made by Yale researchers claims otherwise. Archaeologists have discovered a panel of 4 signs that are believed to have been written around 3250 BCE. Oh, and they've also found another rock drawing depicting a pregnant elephant that can date back to 4000 BCE. Now, there's also a third possibility that fewer people seem to mention: the Indus Valley Civilization, also known as Ancient India, located around the area of modern-day Pakistan and India. The Indus Valley Civilization is also a contender for the oldest civilization due to the uncertain historical origins of the Hindu collection of texts known as the Upanishads. The Indus Valley Civilization flourished around 3000 BCE, but records show that people in the Indus Valley were trading with Mesopotamians as early as 3500 BCE. Now, wait a minute. How is it possible? No, they weren't time travelers. This isn't a sci-fi movie. There already were agricultural settlements in the area that were slowly growing into bigger cities, such as Harappa, and Mohenjo-Daro. Ancient Indian cities were sophisticated, filled with baked brick homes built in a grid system. These ancient cities even had draining and sewage systems that connected most homes and used gravity to carry waste outside of the city. They were pretty advanced. They were also an extremely religious civilization, and Hindu beliefs were at the center of their practices. Despite that, their cities weren't filled with spiritual buildings. Actually, Mohenjo-Daro's most important building was a public bath. Interesting, huh? Now, why can't we know if they were the oldest civilization on Earth? Even if some historians suspect that the origins of the Indus Valley people can be traced back to 5000 BCE, there is no concrete evidence of this, only speculation. The best proof we have is the Upanishads. The Upanishads are texts filled with philosophy, mantras, and ceremonies. The thing is, part of Hindu practices included memorizing and passing down the wisdom of the Upanishads in oral form. So, it took a while before it appeared as a written script. Well, I'd say historians aren't really sure what was the world's first civilization. We can only guess at this point, but who knows what new discoveries might reveal.
When you hear the word mummy, you might get a chill down your spine. That's because most of us associate this word with those creepy characters we've seen in some scary movies. But in reality, mummies have helped us understand a lot about ancient civilizations, their rulers, and about how people used to deal with losing their loved ones. The people most famous worldwide for their mummies are the ancient Egyptians. They believed that some sort of existence after passing away was possible, if certain conditions were met. That's why they insisted on preserving the human body through the process of mummification and placing the mummy in a furnished tomb, kind of like giving it a fully functioning apartment of its own. Why did they believe in this? Well, because they were deeply connected to their natural environment for the most part. They saw the natural cycles around them, like how the sun rose every day, followed by the moon, or how new life was always sprouting from plants, even after they had wilted away. They also believed that the powerful spirit Osiris, who represented the cycle of passing away and resurrection, played a role in this process. To prepare for the afterlife, the ancient Egyptians followed certain rituals, like mummification, which involved using materials like honey, resins, and incense to preserve the body. There's no other mummy more popular than that of King Tut. He was a young pharaoh who ruled over 3,000 years ago in Egypt. The problem with discovering ancient royal tombs is that most of such burial sites were previously robbed. People knew ancient rulers had been left with many valuable belongings, so those locations became vulnerable to thieves. When King Tut's tomb was opened in 1922, people were excited because it had not been robbed, like many other previously discovered royal tombs. That's how well hidden it was. Inside, his mummy was encapsulated in a total of 3 coffins, including one made of gold. The objects found in his tomb showed us what ancient Egypt was like, and studying his mummy also helped us learn about the culture and practices popular at the time when he passed away. We also learned about his family by looking at his DNA. Scientists were able to discover that he had had a disease called malaria and a problem with his foot that might have made it hard for him to walk. Ramses II was another pharaoh in Egypt who ruled for 68 years, which was quite a lot back in the day. He was known for his expansion campaigns and building projects. Many objects from his time as a ruler still exist today, including a large statue of him. Ramses II was about 6 feet tall and lived to be about 90 years old. After looking at his mummy, scientists concluded that he may have had a medical condition that affected his spine. Now, remember those thieves I mentioned before? They are probably the reason why Ramses II ended up in a plain coffin in a secret collection of royal mummies at Deir al-Bahari, which was rediscovered in 1881. Thankfully, archaeologists were able to identify him because his journeys had been recorded on his wrappings. The process was really tedious too. In fact, in ancient Egypt, the mummification process could take a staggering 70 days to complete. A special person would say a very specific speech while delicately handling the body and drying it out using a type of salt called natron. They also used linen and resin to make the body look more lifelike and to wrap it in cloth. The tomb was equally as important for ancient Egyptians. The walls of King Tut's tomb, for example, were adorned with intricate artwork that depicted his journey to the afterlife, from his burial procession to his passage through the underworld. The ancient Egyptians believed that everyone made this journey after passing away, and they filled their tombs with items and paintings to help the person in their spiritual travels. Additionally, the walls of the tomb were decorated with spells from a special book, which contained a collection of poems that the Egyptians believed would help people reach the afterlife. And speaking of how important this journey was, people also placed food in these ancient tombs. In King Tut's tomb, archaeologists discovered 36 jars of vintage beverages and 8 baskets of fruit, which were believed to be left there to help him in his journey to the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that traveling to the afterlife took a really long time, so they left a lot of supplies, such as food and water, to sustain their loved ones. Pharaohs also generally had numerous luxurious garments and beautiful jewelry in their tombs to ensure that they would have a fashionable journey. These items included various types of linen clothing, such as tunics, scarves, gloves, and headdresses, as well as a lot of gold jewelry with precious stones, like bracelets, buckles, pendants, necklaces, rings, and even precious depictions of insects for protection. Some were also deposited with fans made from ivory and ostrich feathers to keep them cool in the afterlife. Some ancient rulers were even placed in their forever apartments along with boats. For example, Pharaoh Khufu built the Great Pyramid at Giza as his tomb, and a large ship was found inside. King Tut, however, was buried with multiple boat paddles, but no actual boat. Instead, he had 3 chariots and numerous walking sticks made of precious materials, perhaps indicating he'd rather travel to the beyond by land, not by water. Amongst the most interesting objects found near ancient mummies are bottles of oils and perfumes. If rulers were supposed to be fashionable, why not smell nice too, right? Also, some of them had some ancient kinds of board games, most of them made out of precious materials like gold or ivory. One of those games was called Senet. It was very popular amongst the ancient Egyptians and very similar to modern-day chess. The ancient Egyptians may have the most famous mummies out there, but they weren't the first to invent the procedure. In fact, it all started in South America with an ancient civilization named the Chinchorro. As far as we know today, these people were the first to mummify their loved ones that had passed away. They did it somewhere around 2,000 years before the Egyptians started their own rituals. Sure, we can tell a lot about ancient rulers by studying these mummies, but until recently, we had no idea what they really looked like during their lifetime. Not so long ago, though, some very special mummy paintings were found by archaeologists studying ancient Egyptian objects. These mummy portraits are highly detailed paintings of individuals that were made while they were still alive. Such paintings were often painted on wood, as opposed to the classical portraits we all know about, which are painted on canvas. They are known for their realism and beauty, and have even been used by researchers to diagnose diseases by comparing them to the corresponding mummies. Some of these portraits also include depictions of jewelry, which was later found on the mummies. The recent discovery of these mummy portraits in Central Egypt is significant, as it marks the first time in over a century that such paintings have been found. Mummies appeared all around the world naturally, too. Mummification can occur without people intervening because of natural conditions, like extremely cold or hot environments, places with a lack of oxygen, or accidental exposure to chemicals that preserve the body. These conditions don't allow bacteria to grow, resulting in the body remaining more or less intact. Famous Otzi was one of these mummies. We know today he was a man who lived around 5,000 years ago in Europe. But upon his discovery in the Alps in 1991, Austrian authorities initially believed that he was a modern mountaineer because of how well preserved the body was. However, after the Iceman was removed from the glacier, it was determined that he was actually from the Copper Age. The year is 1923. Two teenagers sneak out of their homes in the middle of the night in Florida City. Rumor had it that an old man was building a rock castle by himself. But every time someone tried to see what the old man was doing, he would stop working. The curious teens managed to sneak into Ed's backyard and saw something they could later describe as magic. They recalled seeing rocks moving around like helium balloons. The old man was moving up to 30 tons of stone by himself to build his castle. Even if he didn't allow anyone to see him working, he would proudly talk about it around the town. But whenever people asked how he was building a stone castle all on his own, he simply answered, "I cracked the secret of the pyramids." This story begins in Latvia, Edward Leedskalnin's home country. Edward was born in a small village on January 12, 1887. He was born in a family of stonemasons, which is probably where he learned ancient techniques of building. However, he grew up as a sickly boy, which meant he could never carry much weight or undergo heavy physical activity. At the age of 26, an unfortunate turn of events determined Ed's fate. The love of his life broke off their engagement, and heartbroken Ed decided to move to the United States. He lived in a couple of American states before finally moving to Florida, where his life's adventure started. Ed spent years searching for the right spot of land to build his dream house. He always rejected good farmland. When people wondered why, he only smiled. Finally, when he bought land of his own, it was deemed terrible by his close friends. The soil was bedrock. He could neither plow nor farm it, but it seemed perfect for what he was seeking to build. Ed's close friends would often describe him as eccentric. When asked why he wanted to build a house, he would only say, "It's for my sweet 16. Someday she's coming back." Then, he changed the topic of the conversation. It took Ed about 30 years to finish Coral Castle, and he did it all by himself. He would only work under the cloak of night and never let anyone see what he was doing. The completed Coral Castle embodies a number of unsolved mysteries. If you were to visit the site back then, you'd have to go through a 9-ton, 8-foot-tall revolving gate door that even a kid could push with just one finger. Ed was so proud of this door that he originally named the site Rock Gate Park. It was renamed Coral Castle only much later, after Ed's passing. Once inside, visitors would access the incredible wonders of Ed's constructions: towers, mystic symbols, furniture, and swing sets, all made entirely of monolithic blocks of stone. The stones are set on top of each other, using only their weight to keep them together. And believe it or not, the entire park gathers around 1,100 tons of stone. Today, if you visit Ed's living quarters, you'll even see the simple instruments he used to construct all of this: chisels, hammers, ropes, and pulleys. The type of work he did is difficult even with modern-day equipment, let alone without it. Coral Castle's main mystery lies in how Ed managed to do it. The only photograph of Ed Leedskalnin at work shows a simple leverage structure of a chain hoist attached to a wooden tripod. The tripod was made of old telephone poles with a small wooden box on top. What was in the box is, of course, a mystery. Unfortunately, he took his secrets with him, not sharing the truth of his work with anyone else. Yet, not all is lost, as there are many theories and speculation surrounding what could have happened there. One theory says that there is a harmonic grid inside the Earth's surface, something that would create anti-gravity spots around the globe. It's believed that Coral Castle was built in such a spot. This could explain why it took Ed so long to find land that pleased him. Maybe what he was looking for was a place that allowed him to experiment with anti-gravity forces. Yet, whenever Ed talked about his work, he would say he understood the laws of weight and leverage, and, sure thing, that he had cracked the secret of the pyramid builders. And what secret is that, you might ask? According to Ed himself, it has to do with magnetism. He even published a pamphlet called Magnetic Current. There, he explains that every object has magnetic particles inside of them. A person just needs to understand where they are located inside such objects. This way, objects can be lifted and moved around without much effort, just like moving something heavy underwater. Researchers say that if we assume Ed Leedskalnin and the pyramid builders used the same technique, then it would only have taken 4,700 workers to build the Great Pyramid of Giza, instead of the 20,000 to 100,000 that is currently estimated. But this story just keeps on getting more and more mysterious. In the late 1920s, Ed was finishing the construction of Coral Castle in Florida City. Rumors about his work had spread around town. People said Ed was hiding a stash of money somewhere in his living quarters. One night, a group of men waited until Ed was alone and broke into the castle to rob him. They couldn't find the money and, luckily, didn't harm Ed. But in the following days, he decided that it was best he moved out of that land. Of course, he took more than his toothbrush along with him. Ed decided to move the entire Coral Castle to another land 10 kilometers away from where he had built the park. Legend says he hired a truck driver and asked him to swear secrecy about what Ed intended to do. He asked the driver to look away while Ed loaded the truck by himself, moving all of the rocks without any help. With the truck loaded, Ed and his castle moved to Homestead, Florida, where the park is located until this day. In 1986, a group of engineers from Florida University was called to try to fix the park's gate entrance, the 9-ton revolving door that Ed was so proud of. They arrived with plenty of modern-day equipment, including a 20-ton crane. When the engineers took the door down, they noticed that Ed had used a strange circular stone at the bottom of the revolving door. The engineers couldn't understand how this frisbee-sized rock could withstand 9 tons of weight without breaking into pieces. They sent the rock to the geology department at the University of Florida, but the geologists simply returned the rock, saying they couldn't find a match of this rock in their databases. They couldn't determine its origin. The engineers put the 9-ton gate back into place, trying to use other techniques. At first, it didn't work without the base rock Ed had originally used. So, they had to cut the gate rock to make it work as a revolving door once again, proving that modern-day technology couldn't replicate what Ed had done single-handedly. Fast forward to 2011, and another man claimed to have cracked the code of the pyramid builders and Ed Leedskalnin himself. Wally Wallington, a retired construction worker from Lapeer County, Michigan, has managed to build using similar techniques to those used by Ed. Wallington is known for having built his personal Stonehenge in Michigan. He is said to have used simple machines, such as levers and counterweights, moving around multi-thousand-pound concrete blocks. Unlike Ed, Wallington has shared his techniques with the public. Multiple videos are showing the clever engineering he built from very simple materials. It sure is impressive. The man has moved his entire barn into another property just with the help of simple tools. However, there is no way to prove that these were the same techniques used to build Coral Castle. To this day, the secrets of Coral Castle haven't been unraveled. But hey, we can always keep trying to solve it.
Ah, the desert welcomes you with challenging conditions of abandoned environments and extreme temperatures. Hey, some of us would prefer dessert, chocolate over sand and rocks. Oh well. Just like cactuses and camels, buildings have had to adapt to these conditions. Here are some examples of astonishing structures in deserts. These structures are called earthships. They're located in a New Mexico desert town. A large community of like-minded people lives in them. What's even more interesting is that the location of these buildings is registered as dumpsters. Maybe it's because all these structures are made out of old tires, bottles, and cans. Earthships operate using green building principles. About 40% of a typical earthship is built with natural or recycled materials. Imagine the walls made up of hundreds of used tires packed with dirt. Then there are layers of floor-to-ceiling passive solar windows. They gather the sunlight during winter and reflect it in the summer to keep the structures at a reasonable room temperature. You can see plants in corridors and glass bottles or aluminum cans stuffed inside walls. Certainly a distinct house in many ways. Mike Reynolds is an architect who noticed the alarming waste and consumption levels in the 1970s. He designed a fully sustainable home out of cans back then. Almost 40 years later, he becomes the one who brings together all the other Earth shippers. Reynolds drove a Mercedes, but it ran off of the vegetable oil he picked up at fast food restaurants in town. A standard 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom Earthship costs about $250,000 in this town. Yet there are Earthships like Dobson House that can cost as much as $1.5 million. If you do it yourself, with family and friends, you can eliminate the cost of labor, and it becomes relatively less expensive. Let's assume you're really going to build one. Where can it be? Well, anywhere. Earthships currently fit in the cold, dry air of Canada, as well as the hot and humid climate of Haiti. This is the Mirage Mirror House. It's an installation set in the Southern California desert. Mirage opened in 2017 as part of a contemporary art exhibition. It's composed of mirrors. This minimalistic structure blends with the environment around it. The doors, windows, and openings have been removed to create an amazing experience. What you have in the landscape is reflected back to you. How's it made? With mirrored surfaces. At night, the distant lights refract from the mirrors. In the daytime, the sky is transformed into banks of clouds. There's no fixed scenery in this house. How about seeing a futuristic structure in the deep desert? Architects designed a concept home that pairs perfectly with Elon Musk's Cybertruck. The house has a post-apocalyptic theme. I mean, when I say post-apocalyptic, it's because I can't say it. Anyway, the house is designed to survive in a disaster scenario. The cyber house has steel gates, the windows are armored, and the exterior walls are made out of super strong material. Modern house is controlled by an autonomous geothermal heat pump. To put it in less sci-fi terms, you can keep the internal temperature steady. This sleek house has an entrance that can fit the Cybertruck. After all, it's inspired by it in the first place. Plus, the Cybertruck can be lifted to the second floor to be more secure. This is King Abdullah Petroleum Studies and Research Center in Saudi Arabia. Basically, it's a laboratory in a desert. It was designed to demand minimum energy. The architecture has patterns on the walls and ceilings, giving reference to the local tradition of geometric form. The next stop is Swartberg House in South Africa. This one is located near the Swartberg Mountains, but don't get too excited. It's on the edge of the Great Karoo Desert. It's a 4-bedroom apartment. It has a special temperature regulating system. The system works like a shield from the heat in the summer and as a sun trap in the winter. You're looking at the Grand Mosque of Djenné in Mali. This mosque is 52 feet tall. This is impressive because it's made of only sticks and a special mix of mud and other natural elements found in the desert. Petra is an ancient city hidden in the Jordan Desert. The structures are carved directly into red, white, and pink-colored sandstone cliff faces. It's located among the canyons and mountains near the desert. The place was a trade center many years ago. You might already see pictures of the impressive facade of the treasury. This structure still holds many mysteries in it. For starters, scientists can't explain how the Nabateans managed to create such a structure thousands of years ago. Did you know that there's another mysterious place in the middle of the desert that has a similar structure to Petra? Median Saleh was like a second capital of the Nabatean kingdom. Yet another secret they left for us to decipher. It has over 100 decorated tombs and more than 1,000 non-monumental graves. Plus, inscriptions and cave drawings are also here, again surrounded by sandstone. This wooden shack was a post office once. The structure is in the Tengger Desert of Mongolia. It's surrounded by nothing. Sand is the only thing that accompanies the lonely structure. The building is only 23 square inches. As you can guess, it didn't get too many visitors. It was abandoned for over 35 years. Its fate changed one day when a woman discovered the building. Mrs. Zhang and her friend came up with an idea. They were going to reach businesses and people who wanted to send letters and postcards from the world's loneliest post office without actually visiting the place. It worked. The post office rarely gets visitors in place, but it's busy online. Over 20,000 letters and postcards were sent from the Desert Post Office in December 2021 alone. The place is about 6 miles off the nearest road. A post truck picks the letters up and hits the road for delivery. Eventually, they are shipped all over the world. A second destination in Saudi Arabia is King Abdulaziz Center for World Culture. The building has an interesting design. It took nearly a decade to build this complex structure. It's a 321-foot-tall tower which stands out with its look. Stone Matters Pavilion is a stone structure in Palestine. The structure spans a surface area of 93 square inches. It has been built entirely out of 300 interlocking stones that mutually support each other. The concave roofs, and yes, they look like giant bowls, are designed that way to collect rainwater. The structure is in Iran. Interestingly, in Iran, the evaporation rate is 3 times faster than the world average, so this bowl-like design comes in very handy. It captures the water in a way that the water can form a single mass as a whole before it evaporates. The outer shell of the roof system collects rainwater, but it also works as an additional shading. It makes air move freely, designed like a cooling mechanism for both roofs. Eco Lodge in Egypt is the next stop. The project is built in a place that overlooks the desert and is constructed using locally available materials like sun-fired bricks and palm wood. The building is an example of traditional architecture. There's a water basin that lets in the air to keep the interior cool. A worthy mention is the CID Interpretation Center in Chile. Chile's Atacama Desert is among the top tourist destinations in the country. To help the tourists, architects designed a visitors center as part of the infrastructure for the wind farm. Here, the cold winter months don't freeze people because the large windows make the most of solar heating. What's even more interesting is that the building is designed to go completely dark at night. Imagine you somehow bumped into the building by accident. Black Desert House is a building respecting the stars. At night, this house goes completely dark. It dissolves into the night, so the stars can appear more prominent. Now, any mysterious desert buildings you know that aren't on this list? Let us know in the comments. So looky here, scientists discovered ancient artifacts near King Tut's tomb. Turns out, his VIP final resting place looks more like a public graveyard with about a dozen wooden coffins that's been there for around 3,600 years. Okay, I might have exaggerated a tad. The 11 tombs weren't exactly right next to King Tut, but they were close, near the same city of Luxor. New findings in Egyptian tombs can help us piece together what life was like in ancient Egypt. And guess what? Ancient Egyptians seem to have been remarkably like us, modern humans. Say, the women have always loved jewelry, and archaeologists retrieved a beautifully made necklace with 30 amethyst beads and 2 agate beads, plus a hippo head amulet. Bet it was all the rage back then. Researchers also discovered 2 copper mirrors. One had a handle shaped like a lotus, and the other was decorated with Hathor, the ancient Egyptian deity of the sky, women, fertility, and love. These recent excavations near Tutankhamun's burial site led to another jaw-dropping revelation. For the first time in thousands of years, fragments of Queen Hatshepsut's Valley Temple were uncovered. This fearless woman was thought to be the second female pharaoh, who ruled with both courage and wisdom, leaving a legacy as solid as the stones themselves. Her temple, hidden for ages, opens a window into a time filled with power, intrigue, and spiritual devotion. Archaeologists found over 1,000 beautifully decorated stone blocks on the outskirts of Hatshepsut's funerary temple. There were very few women who managed to take the throne in ancient Egypt. Another tomb was found nearby, and it belonged to the overseer of Queen Teti Sheri's palace, whose name was Jehuti-Mez. Queen Hatshepsut seems to have even more tombs, aces up her sleeve. These tombs were carved into the rock instead of being built as pyramids, showing a unique ancient perspective on how to protect the soul in the afterlife. Experts managed to retrieve some cool ancient pieces from the site. Toys made of clay, mummy masks, winged scarabs, and some amulets. Sadly, there surely used to be way more artifacts, but over the last centuries, there have been people other than archaeologists to stumble upon this site. It's likely that looters got to these tombs before them and may have taken some valuable items. But they did leave behind some cool stuff for the researchers, like pottery used for offerings of bread and meat, along with archers' bows that connect the tomb's owners to the Egyptian military. Meanwhile, soul protection is way more important than you might think, especially if you're roaming around Luxor looking for ancient secrets. You aren't scared of King Tut's curse, are you? Let me tell you what happened to those who weren't scared, but promise me to take it with a dash of salt, okay? For years, Egyptologists, especially those who believed in paranormal activity, were convinced that there was an unsettling curse surrounding Tutankhamun's archaeological discoveries. This belief stemmed from the mysterious and untimely demise of several excavators who discovered the tomb in 1922 with no logical explanation for why they passed away. It was just easier to chalk it up to something supernatural and avoid the whole mess. But it turns out it wasn't a curse at all. It was likely the radiation that caused those excavators to perish. Now, you might wonder where the radiation came from. After all, while radioactivity was discovered in the 19th century, ancient Egyptians, despite their impressive pyramids, didn't have any radium lying around to make Tut's tomb glow like crazy. So, what could be the real story? It might have been toxic waste behind it all. Toxic levels of radiation from uranium and hazardous waste have been lurking inside the tomb since it was sealed over 3,000 years ago. The burial chamber of Tutankhamun's tomb reportedly has such high radiation levels that anyone who steps inside could easily end up with a fatal dose of radiation sickness or an incurable condition. By the way, you can have a somewhat similar level of radioactivity if you don't get rid of those moldy dinner leftovers you left to perish in your fridge a month ago. But this radioactivity isn't exclusive to Tutankhamun's tomb. Ancient Egyptian artifacts discovery is rewarding yet dangerous due to unusually high radiation levels in Old Kingdom tombs all over Egypt. Geiger counters have detected radiation at 2 sites near the Giza pyramids, and radon, a radioactive gas, has been found in several underground tombs in Saqqara. Interestingly, experts believe that the builders of these ancient tombs were aware of the toxins, as some eerie warnings were carved into the walls of many tombs. One inscription ominously declared, "They that break this tomb shall meet their end by a malady that no doctor can diagnose." Other ominous phrases like "forbidden," "due to evil spirits," only added to the fear that supernatural curses haunted these ancient sites. Ominous signs have stunned archaeologists since forever, but the fear grew even stronger a century ago with the mysterious passing of Lord Carnarvon, who funded King Tut's excavation in 1922 and reportedly explored the treasure-filled rooms, along with several others who entered the tomb. Arthur Weigall, another British Egyptologist who was present at the tomb's opening and is credited with starting the curse myth, passed away young when he was just in his 50s in 1934. Chances are the condition that made him pass was connected to radiation. In total, 6 out of the 26 people who were there when the tomb was opened met their end within a decade from various causes. Not only X-ray exposure, those reasons include asphyxia, stroke, heart failure, pneumonia, and even poisoning. Well, isn't this getting a little grim? There was one guy who opened the tomb and somehow managed to avoid the infamous curse, Howard Carter, or so it seemed. Some folks pointed to his survival as proof that the curse wasn't real. After digging up the tomb, Carter published several books on the topic and shifted gears from archaeology to dealing in antiquities for various museums. Despite dodging demise or injury, rumors swirled about how the curse may have impacted him in other ways. One of the big stories linked him to Lord Carnarvon's daughter, Evelyn. Some said he was madly in love with her, but she married someone else, so he chose to stay single. Others claimed they had an affair while she was in Egypt, which ended when her father passed away and she left the country for good. However, there wasn't much evidence to support these stories. Evelyn was just 6 when they met, and they remained friends until his last breath. She was even one of the few attendees at his funeral, but denied any romantic involvement, saying they weren't that close. A year after the revolutionary discovery near King Tut's tomb, Evelyn married politician Sir Brograve Beauchamp and had a daughter. That same year, Beauchamp toured the tomb with his parents, guided by Carter himself. Carter never married and, aside from those posthumous rumors about Evelyn, had no other romantic connections. While the curse adds an intriguing twist to his life story, his tendency to keep relationships at arm's length was evident long before the tomb was opened. It seemed Carter just wasn't a people person. In 1939, after battling a serious illness, he ultimately succumbed to fate. He was 64, which was a pretty common life expectancy in the UK back then, so no one really thought it was off and linked it to an ancient curse. When he passed, it turned out he had several artifacts from Tutankhamun's tomb in his London apartment, which were eventually sent back to Egypt, marking what some viewed as the curse's end. Who knows? Maybe if he hadn't had all those ancient souvenirs at his place, he would have lived way longer. But all the other demises might seem off. The curse theory was likely fueled by some strange events during the excavation. Carnarvon got a mosquito bite that became severely infected, and around the time they opened the tomb, Cairo experienced a bizarre power outage and a freak sandstorm. Back in England, the Earl's dog, Susie, managed to escape from Carnarvon's house and began barking frantically at seemingly nothing. At least that's what the staff and family saw. Strangely enough, at the very moment her owner's heart stopped, Susie started howling and fell down without showing any signs of life. Maybe radiation didn't play a crucial role after all, and those were indeed ancient artifacts from King Tut's tomb that made them all perish. Spooky, huh?